Good morning, everybody, to what is a momentous week for employers and businesses in California, and for employers also a momentous day, because we hope by the end of today we have firmly planted new rules and guidance for all of us to operate on. To kind of begin, the California Department of Industrial Relations, which includes CalOSHA, sent an email last Friday that employers must verify and document the vaccination status of fully vaccinated employees if they do not wear face coverings indoors. And this is the key change which we will be talking about. The rules and things we're talking about today are subject to a hearing by the California Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board. And normally, if the Standards Board acted, they would then have to submit their regulations to the Office of Administrative Law, and it would take some time for the rules to be in effect. The governor has said this week that if the CalOSHA Standards Board adopts the regulations that are proposed, he will issue an executive order to make them effective immediately. So we're talking about real time. Also, yesterday, CalOSHA issued a frequently asked questions about these regulations and COVID in the workplace. And that frequently asked questions is available on the CalOSHA website, but we also have a copy and can forward it to anybody who sends us an email and asks for it. If you need more specific information, that's a good source to look at. To give you a little background, CalOSHA Standards Board published proposed regulations on June 11th. They're meeting today, and this is the third updated version by the Standards Board in the month of June to try and establish new rules that are more practical and effective for California employers. We're going to discuss today recent developments, which are including CDC and other agency announcements, go over the CalOSHA regulation update, talk briefly about the requirement for employers to provide N95 masks, and hopefully allow you enough information to make some key decisions for your business. There are 4 questions I think you need to answer for your own operation. Are we going to inquire from employees if they're vaccinated? Are we going to have a rule that requires employees to be vaccinated? Based on these decisions, what changes need to be made in our written COVID policy? And what should our mask policy be for both employees and customers and guests and suppliers of our business? So they all are interrelated, but they're a little different in each of the questions. Going over the recent developments, as I had indicated a little moment ago, CalOSHA issued new modified regulations on June 12th. On June 15th, the governor issued and had previously announced the reopening of California. And California is mostly open. Now, the mostly we'll talk about a little bit because that relates to specific situations such as K through 12 schools, healthcare facilities, jails and prisons, and what they call mega events, events that are indoors where there are 5,000 attendees, or outdoor events where there are 10,000 or more attendees. But those are minor and don't affect most employers most of the time. CalOSHA Standard Board meeting today. This reference to the effective date of June 28th, I think is not going to not apply because we expect the governor at the end of today to issue an executive order making these changes in effect. And just a heads up on what's coming, on July 31st, 2021, all employers must provide an N95 mask to employees that are not fully vaccinated, which gets us to the issue, which is an operational one. What decisions is your company going to be making to comply with these laws? A little more background. In May, the Centers of Disease Control stated that vaccinated persons do not need to wear a mask or socially distance. And that was then the beginning of the rest of the changes were involved. Also in May, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission issued a policy that said employers can require employees to be vaccinated, with the proviso that employees who have a physical disability that prevents wearing a mask or vaccination, or who have a sincerely held religious belief against vaccinations are exempted and must be accommodated in some other way. And that if you obtain information that your employees are vaccinated, it is what we call medically confidential information, which means that you need to limit the access to the employees who need to know, or owners or managers who need to know. On May 21st, the California Department of Public Health issued its reopening guidance, which affects workplace and businesses as they are conducting their business. It doesn't change CalOSHA rules itself, but it gives a guideline. And what we hope at the end of the day is that the Department of Public Health orders, the Centers for Disease Control orders, and CalOSHA orders are all going to be consistent and something that you can live with. And this will be effective at least through October 1 of this year. On June 9th, 2021, 15 months after COVID, just to let you know, the Federal Occupational Safety Administration has promulgated its own emergency temporary standard, but only for healthcare employers. They have voluntary guidance, but California employers do not really need to worry about OSHA because our CalOSHA regulations take effect and are more stringent and apply. And so, but I did want you to know, if you have operations in other states, to be aware of federal OSHA's interest. There are also other states that have their own rules. So as of 6/17, the Workplace Safety Board, what I call the CalOSHA Standards Board, has flip-flopped on mask rules, issuing and then withdrawing rules that have required all workers to be masked if anyone in the same room was unvaccinated. That's not going to be what the rule is. This comes at a time when there is a polarized national debate over COVID-19 protections, with many people objecting to government interventions and others worrying that we relaxed the standards for CalOSHA and COVID protection too early. So we have a range of emotions, and among your own workers, I'm sure you're going to find the same thing. Some people are impatient to move forward and do away with all of this falderall, and other people who are concerned that it's not safe and are not ready to give up their masks or even be around people who don't wear masks. So the California Department of Public Health is one of the agencies that we need to be concerned with in California. And they announced earlier this week that vaccinated Californians will not need to wear masks in public, except for on public transportation, which is trains, buses, airplanes, K through 12 schools and similar youth situations, and healthcare settings, which include healthcare facilities, as well as homeless shelters and cooling facilities. CalOSHA does govern places where employees work. When it comes to this question of is someone vaccinated or not, unfortunately, the CalOSHA frequently answered questions that were just issued are in compliance with this. You can use essentially what we call the honor system, which means that businesses have three options for masks and for employees. You can allow people to self-attest, to tell you in some way that they have been vaccinated. You can verify their vaccination to determine whether they're required to wear a mask. And or you can have a policy, you don't have to change, and you can require everybody to continue to wear masks. I would suggest in the workplace that's going to be difficult because employees, in many cases, are already dispensing with wearing masks. So the general summary of the rules are masks or face coverings are required for unvaccinated workers, and that's still the case. Physical distancing rules, such as 6 feet away and all that, are not any longer in effect. They are deleted. However, employers have to document employees' vaccination status unless you adopt a rule that says all employees at all times on company premises must wear a mask. You also need to continue to provide COVID training, and we would suggest the most effective way of providing COVID training is through posters, which are available from the Centers for Disease Control, free to download. But you do need to have some communications about COVID and COVID symptoms and so on. Also, N95 respirators must be available to unvaccinated employees. So what should employers do to take care of all this? One of the interesting challenges is how are you going to find out if employees have been vaccinated, which ones have been vaccinated, which ones have not? Unless you decide that everybody has to wear a mask all the time, you're going to need to have this issue of determining who's been vaccinated. And because it's medically private information, you can't have a single sheet on a clipboard and ask people to acknowledge or initial whether they have or haven't been vaccinated, because that way you'd be exposing people's answers to other employees. But you do need to have a way of recording it, because the question can come up, how did you verify? Now, verify can be what we call self-verification, meaning I said I was vaccinated. You don't have to treat this as a I-9 immigration form where you've got to inspect a copy of their certificate of vaccination. You can, and I would guess most employers will, rely on what we call the self-verification process. Whatever changes you make in your COVID prevention issues, you need to have a written, updated COVID prevention plan. For most employers, this is going to mean taking their old plan out and modifying it slightly to base on what they've decided to do about recording employees' vaccination status and wearing masks. You need to continue to offer COVID testing to an employee who has what we call a close contact with a COVID case, and I'll define COVID case in just a few minutes. But you don't have to offer testing to a person who's been fully vaccinated or has had COVID and remains symptom-free. If you have a COVID case, you need to determine the time and date of the case and when it was in the workplace, so that and the date that the person had their first symptoms. So hopefully the incidence of COVID is declining, but we're still having 400 or 500 people a day in the state of California being diagnosed with COVID. But I would hope that the rush of many people being involved in this that we saw in January, February, and even March will have reduced to the point where this is a theoretical discussion for most of you. But you do need to know what to do if it happens. If you have a COVID case, then you do need to determine who's been in close contact during what we call the high-risk period. So CalOSHA's regulations, which we hope are effective today, have some definitions, and this is why it's important to know what these terms mean. So a work site means where people are reporting to work, and if a person is working from home, it's not a work site, and these regulations don't apply to people who have COVID who are working remotely. In the past, many people had employees who were working remotely. That's ending rapidly now, and many companies are having employees, and some have had all during this whole process, report to work. A COVID case, which is a term that's used in these regulations, is a person who's tested positive for COVID or diagnosed with COVID by a medical provider. So an employee who says, I have COVID, doesn't qualify for a COVID case unless he has a positive test or has a diagnosis from a medical provider. Close contact, which triggers if somebody has a COVID case, means being within 6 feet of the person for 15 minutes or more in a 24-hour period. Now, including unless wearing a respirator or mask, so that if a person is wearing a mask, even if we're within 6 feet under the new regs, that's not a close contact. But you can have an exposed group, and these are people who are present in the area where the person with COVID was. There's some notices. If you have a COVID case within 1 business day of knowledge, you have to notify the employees who were present in the work area where that person worked of the COVID. Some of you have had this experience and been giving these notices, but we hope that you have this very rarely on a going forward basis. The notice has certain elements that have to be included in it. And so that's a form that's available to you if you need to give such notice. You also have to make testing available at your cost and on. Am I muted?
No, you're back.
Okay. Testing must be made available to all who had contact with the COVID case during a high-risk exposure period. Investigation to determine whether workforce conditions and exposures exist must occur, and training has to occur. Now, hopefully you've been doing training for employees during this period. The training would include what your policies are, which can be updated now because of these new rules. What benefits are available to someone who has COVID, which would include things like if your company is voluntarily complying with the Families First Coronavirus federal law, they can receive pay for that. They can also be eligible for state disability insurance. They also could be available for potentially a workers' comp claim. Although fortunately, we have had very few clients with employees with workers' comp claims from COVID. You need to tell people how COVID is transmitted, that people should stay home if they have illness symptoms, and the importance of vaccinations. Social distancing is not required any longer unless you have mega events. So social distancing is required for unvaccinated people, but not for vaccinated people. Also a reminder, and I'll say this several times during the presentation, starting July 31, 2021, and there's no reason, frankly, to wait until July. We should do it now. All employers who are not vaccinated must be given or made available. They don't have to be given in 95 minutes, but they have to be told that they can have one. It's voluntary. It's available to them at no cost. And if you give an employee a N95 mask, you should give them some instructions on how to wear the mask, which often are on the box that you had or available from posters. Fully vaccinated employees without symptoms do not need to wear face coverings. And no one needs to wear face coverings if they're alone in a room or outside while eating or drinking. The exclusion for workplace applies. These are rules that we had before that are still in effect. If a person is exposed to COVID in a close contact, meaning within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, they need to be told to go home and stay away from work for 10 days, unless they're fully vaccinated and are asymptomatic or are recovered from COVID. Many employers may not know about the recovery from COVID. So if you're going to be asking your employees if they're vaccinated or not, you may want to ask them if they're recovering from COVID or have had COVID as a way to be able to comply with these rules. Contacts who were not vaccinated can come back to work after 10 days from the last known close contact. If they have symptoms, they have to be excluded until the 10 days have passed and 24 hours with no fever. COVID cases with positive test results are excluded for 10 days since the date of the first positive test. We do have employees that have had more than one positive test. And the first positive test means the first positive test in the current episode. Just be aware, employers cannot require a negative test to return to work. You also can't, you can, however, have a policy that requires vaccination. That's up to you. Those excluded from work by these rules must be paid their wages and benefits, but can be using paid sick leave or PTO or other benefits. And if they receive SDI or workers' comp, that's all the pay that they're entitled to. Now, we do have outbreaks, and there's a minor outbreak, which is where there are 3 or more COVID cases within a 14-day period, or mega outbreaks where there's 20 or more cases within a 30-day period. We've had several clients who had the minor outbreaks. I don't know of any of our clients that have had a mega outbreak at this time. Remember, if you have an outbreak, there needs to be notice to the local public health agency. Testing has to be offered to unvaccinated employees for 2 times a week during the outbreak, which would be either during the 14-day or 30-day period. And for all employees, even those with vaccination status, you need to resume social distancing during the outbreak. For fully vaccinated employees, they don't need to get tested or quarantined after close contact unless they have symptoms. They don't have to wear face masks. If an employee does not wear a face mask indoors, the employer has to verify and record their vaccination status. And this is an affirmative obligation if you're going to allow people to work without masks. Employees who are vaccinated are explicitly allowed to wear masks anyway without fear of retaliation because of their own personal sense of concern. Except for certain employees during a major outbreak, physical distancing rules have been canceled. Employers must provide voluntary respirators to those who have not been fully vaccinated if they request it. There are special rules for those of you who provide housing or transportation. This includes employees riding together on company business in a company pickup or truck, etc. You have to provide testing to unvaccinated employees who develop symptoms and vaccinated employees who develop symptoms after close contact. Employers, since the testing is available free, we would encourage you to do it. Also, testing is now available from CVS and other stores and have extended hours. So it is rarely required that someone miss work to go get a test because there are ample places to get COVID testing that are available before and after regular work hours. Employers must evaluate their ventilation system. And the idea is bringing in outdoor air to the extent possible. So here's the bottom line after this is all done. Are you going to require employees to tell you if they're vaccinated? And if you're going to do that, how are you going to do it? Are you going to require employees to be vaccinated to come to work? With the exceptions of religion or disabilities, you can do that. No matter what you decide, is your written COVID policy up to date and reflect what you now do? The general question, what should your mask policy be? You can have a mask policy that says if you're vaccinated, come on in, you don't have to wear it. Or you can have some variation of that. If you have put up social distancing, plexiglass screens and other things, I would suggest you may not want to take them down, although legally you can. The problem is in certain areas of even California, there are a number of people who have not been vaccinated. And the newest variant or mutation of the COVID virus seems to be both more contagious and more aggressive with more serious symptoms. I think that we could have, if we don't do things right, a resurgence again or another surge of COVID infections, and then these rules are going to change. So if you already equipped your facility with plexiglass, et cetera, You may want to leave it on for the summer because you don't want to have to go through and put it back if the rules change. But I hope that's helpful to you. I'll know that there are probably some individual questions. To the extent we can, we've tried to cover everything you need to know. And at this point, we will take questions. Okay. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a couple questions. So, will you please explain how employers can get employees tested?
Okay. There are some commercial facilities, and we can give you referrals who will even come to your work site to do testing if you want. But the most convenient and easiest is a Walgreens or CVS pharmacy store because they're readily available throughout Southern California. And most of the facilities now do not require a reservation. You can actually walk in and get tested. You can also work with your own doctor, or if you have an occupational clinic that does your workers' comp work, they can provide it. But testing is widely available in the easiest places through our CVS or Walgreens.
We are a youth organization. If I understand correctly, we can ask for a copy of their vaccination card to put in a confidential file. Is that correct?
You can have a policy that in the verification is a choice that you have. So you can actually require someone to show you their vaccination card. Realize that children under 12 can't get vaccinations, and many children between 12 and 17 are not yet vaccinated. However, you can just have a policy where you say, will you tell me, have you had vaccine, yes or no, and make a note of that, and that's sufficient. Or you could ask for a copy of their certificate if you wish. And that's what the California Department of Public Health has said.
Is a respirator the same as an N95 mask?
Yes, we're using the word N95 as a mask. It's not the only mask that's required. The regulations do provide you can use masks of other types, surgical masks, fabric masks. If you use a fabric mask or scarf, you have to have 2 layers of fabric. A single layer of fabric does not qualify as a mask under the rules. But an N95 is specifically referred to because it has some features that are assured under the Food and Drug Administration rules to be effective.
What happens if an unvaccinated individual refuses to wear a mask at work?
You tell them that they can't work there unless they have a religious reason or a serious medical reason. And if it's a serious medical reason, you would ask them to give you a medical certificate from their doctor describing what the limitations are. And at that point, then you have the duty to what we call reasonably accommodate. Now, reasonably accommodate does not mean allowing them to come into your building, but it may mean you can offer them work outdoors or remotely from home.
Can we get these rules sent to us?
Yes, if you'll send an email to info@calworksafetyhr.com, we'll send you the frequently asked questions and a summary of the presentation today.
Do we still need to perform temp checks?
No, there's no particular reference in any of the regulations to temperature checks. The reason we instituted temperature checks in the beginning, which is still true, if a person is ill and has a fever, you should have a stay at home or excluded from work policy, but you do not need to go through the process. You legally can, nothing in the rules says you have to stop taking temperatures, but frankly, it's an outmoded part of the concept because if people have vaccines, that's the governing issue. And if they don't have vaccines, they need to be wearing masks.
Do we still have to report COVID cases to workers' comp company?
Yes, the rule on reporting a COVID case to workers' comp hasn't yet been dealt with by anybody and will probably expire in September of this year.
We are located inside a hospital and also considered retail. Doesn't that mean masks are still required in the workplace? By the way, because we had an outbreak early on, most of our staff is fully vaccinated.
The term doesn't define healthcare facility. However, if you are in what you would consider a healthcare facility, masks are required.
Would my employees in California get the California COVID supplement leave of 80 hours plus the federal family's first coronavirus response act of 80 hours for COVID leave since that was extended to 9/30/21?
The extension is on a voluntary basis. So employers can voluntarily agree to pay 80 hours, and it's not an 80 plus 80, it's one set of 80 hours. The advantage of that is that if a worker can't work because of COVID, is excluded because of a positive test or a diagnosis, he gets some pay and you're fully reimbursed for the cost from your payroll taxes that are payable. So that provision will continue until it expires in the fall. But that's an option that employers have. And if you decided to do it, you don't have to continue it. You can stop that policy. If you have not done it in the past, you can start that policy, at least now during this period. But it's a voluntary policy for employers.
Does this mean that the maximum amount of employees allowed in, say, a break room or restroom can now have the limit taken off?
Yes. The social distancing rules and how many people within so many feet are removed. And if any of you have been to some places like South Coast Plaza lately, you'll see all the 6 feet stay apart signs have been taken away because as of June 15th, those social distancing rules do not apply.
Let's see. If we offered voluntary COVID-19 supplemental pay, can we stop offering this pay?
Yes, there's no requirement that you continue to offer it for the rest of the year. And it's a practical matter. You should be seeing very few people who are coming forward now testing positive or reporting a COVID diagnosis. Still possible, still happens. And it will continue to happen on a sporadic basis until we get more widespread participation in vaccinations.
We have a couple questions again about room capacity and social distancing. Can you please explain it again?
The social distancing rules or limits on how many people to a room are now eliminated and not part of the regulations from CalOSHA, nor are they part of Centers for Disease Control.
Do we still need to have staff complete an entry to building screening questionnaire?
My suggestion is you replace that entry to building questionnaire every day with the new question: how am I going to know who has a vaccine and who doesn't? So I know who has to wear a mask and who doesn't. So you don't have to keep asking that question every day, but you need to decide how you're going to handle this issue of determining vaccination status for your workers.
What happens if you know someone is not vaccinated, but they say they are?
If you know that they're not vaccinated, I would suggest you require them to wear a mask and tell them you're required to wear a mask until you can provide proof of vaccination. Because an unvaccinated person is a unexploded stick of dynamite for themselves and for everyone around them. And as you've already know, because I'm sure you've seen in the news, certain people like Bill Maher, who's a television performer, had vaccinations and still came down with COVID, although fortunately it was asymptomatic and very small. But vaccinations are not 100%, they're 90-some%. But if a person's not being honest about their vaccination status, they're a danger to themselves and to everyone around them.
Just to clarify, can we mandate that an employee disclose whether he or she has been vaccinated?
Yes, you can, because you can require them to be vaccinated. You'd have to verify their vaccination status. So this is a question they do have to answer. And if they don't answer, you have to treat them as an unvaccinated person.
Can employers begin to take mask required signs off the front lobby doors?
My suggestion is you take a look at your mask sign and basically change it to read, if you have not had the COVID vaccine, you must wear a mask in our premises, because not everybody has to wear them. But you do need to, or it's a good idea to tell people, hey, if you're not vaccinated, we do have a rule that says wear a mask. So I'd change the mask sign. I wouldn't take them all down, but I'd change them.
I thought the California COVID supplement pay was required through September for vaccines and COVID cases, and we had it show on pay stubs. Are you saying it is voluntary for employers?
If a person is a COVID case, meaning diagnosed or tested positive, the workplace exclusion rules still apply, and the California law requires them to be paid in some form. That's separate from the federal family FFCRA, which was a federal law. The federal law is voluntary, but the California law does require people who are COVID case who are excluded to be paid. However, the pay can be state disability insurance benefits, does not have to be yours. And the regulations now clarify, if they get SDI, that's all they get. They don't have to get a supplemental pay from you. So this is a little bit of a tricky question. In my mind, I would recommend employers voluntarily continue the pay for the benefits, because you get a deduction from your payroll taxes and it's a benefit to your employee. But that's a policy decision the employer gets to make.
Can we ask and keep the vaccination records in the employee file?
I would suggest, if you have vaccination records or information about vaccine status, and I think all of the HR professionals will concur, that you have a special either folder or file in their personnel file that's medical confidential information. Because if you have people who are going to peruse or look at a personnel file, they should not automatically also be looking at confidential medical records. So what the EEOC has said is that you can ask this question, but the answer to it is still medically confidential information. So it's a little bit of a two-step dance, but it's not a significant burden.
We have employees claiming California supplemental pay from getting sick because of the vaccine. We can discontinue this.
That policy is voluntary. So yes, you can discontinue it, because the COVID case, which triggers the exclusion from the workplace, refers to the being a diagnosed or tested positive. However, you do have to give people time. If you require vaccinations, you have to give them time to get the vaccination. And if you require them to get a vaccination, then they need to be given time to recover from symptoms of the vaccination. So that gets us back to, do you have a policy that requires all employees to get vaccinations or not?
Okay. And you can require that. You can
Yes.
require that. Okay. Can a face shield be worn instead of an N95 mask?
Well, first of all, a face shield, the N95 mask doesn't have to be worn, it has to be provided. A face shield, depending on how the face shield is structured, but if many of the face shields have open areas beneath the shield so that respirated germs can easily transmit, they just don't go straight out, but they can go down. Technically, that's not a compliant mask. If you wore a mask under the face shield, then you've got the protections. Because the face shield, if you think about it, doesn't capture all of the expirated particles.
Can employers refuse to allow the employee to return to work unless they show proof of vaccination?
Yes, you can have a policy that requires vaccination.
Will HIPAA laws affect how we ask people for their vax records?
My suggestion is you wouldn't ask them all lined up so one person can hear the answers of the other employees, but that you would ask them in a quiet or low-key basis one at a time and have some kind of note, record, or otherwise of what they told you.
If the employee's reason for not getting vaccinated is neither religious nor medical, what is our position?
They don't have any rights, so that's your policy. You can either say you can't work here if you require vaccinations, or you can say you must wear a mask. And realize even people who are vaccinated can voluntarily wear a mask if they want.
Is it legal for HOAs not to allow our employees to use the pool restrooms simply because they don't know if they have been vaccinated?
You have to have restroom facilities available under the industrial welfare orders. So I don't think you can prohibit people from being at work, but you can't prohibit them from not going into certain areas of the building. And realize the social distancing rules don't apply anyway.
Is having COVID-19 allowed someone not to get vaccinated? Wait.
No. There are certain rules, and you saw as I went through the presentation that you have different treatment for people who've had a COVID infection. However, the demonstration is that people who have had COVID before are not protected from some of the new mutant varieties. Unfortunately for us, in other words, you can't rely on the normal immunities you acquired because of having COVID. However, the good news is all of the vaccines that are approved and in use do apply and are effective against all these variations. So the point is a person who has had COVID should be vaccinated, and you could have a policy that requires vaccination. There's a different treatment for exclusions and other things as I went through, but that doesn't mean that's what the employer has to have as their policy.
Can we ask the company for a list of who has been vaccinated and those who have not?
A person is not entitled to know the status of others. So the people who have a right to the medical information are people like human resources or a foreman or a supervisor or somebody who for a business purpose needs to know the information. Other people aren't entitled to know everybody else's status. Now, as a practical matter, as I think some of you know, this is a common subject of discussion among people. And very often people willingly share whether they've been vaccinated, when they were vaccinated, what vaccine they had, et cetera. But those are voluntary discussions, and realize that the company's records are medically protected.
What can we ask for to corroborate the religious exemption?
Basically, I would ask an employee what their concern is and what's the basis for it. We're not to judge it, we agree or disagree, but we want them to explain it in a sufficient version. Now, frankly, there are a couple of religions who do have a tenet about vaccinations, and I think generally people know that. So if someone says, I'm a Christian Scientist, then that would probably be something that you would understand. That doesn't mean that they can't have other sources of their religious belief, but you are entitled to say, I need to know whether it's a sincerely held belief, so you need to explain to me the basis of it. Or you could accept them at face value, but that's up to you.
Will you please explain what a valid religious reason is? Okay. There we go.
That's some valid, sincerely held religious belief is something where people say my faith requires, etc. The differentiation is that people said I'm scared of vaccines, or I don't trust vaccines, or I get a magnetized body if I have vaccines, if some of you saw that clip on television. That's all stuff that doesn't count. Being afraid, not trusting the government, that's not a legal basis for making this decision. So really, that's why I would simply ask a person, explain to me what the basis of your belief is, which could be biblical sourced, or could be a prophet saying, or who knows. We're not going to judge whether it's a correct vision or not. We simply want to test whether it's sincere.
So you can request employees show vaccine cards to prove that they have been vaccinated instead of depending on their word.
You can, yes.
We are a food manufacturer. Can we still require screening and temp check on entry to the building? Or is that out of line?
No, that's nothing wrong with that at all. And what we're talking about are CalOSHA worker protections, not food safety standards, which are under the FDA and your safe food handling processes. So all of the steps you take for safe food handling, you can continue to engage in.
Would the company be liable if an employee comes to work every day and refuses to get vaccinated?
If they come to work every day and wear a mask, the company's not liable. But if they don't wear a mask and you know they're not vaccinated, they're violating the rules and you're violating the rules.
I think that
they're
brings
not going
us
to get a fine from CalOSHA, but you will. So you can't tolerate that.
Do we have any more questions? We have hand washing stations set up and require staff to use upon entry to the building. Can we still mandate employees do that?
Yes, I highly recommend that. And realize all we've been talking about today is COVID-19. But many of us observed that there's been a very low instances of colds and a flu in the last 15 months because of the compliance with safety protections for COVID. Some people may want to wear face masks on an ongoing basis because of asthma or air pollution or allergies, and they certainly are effective for dealing with colds and flu. And just remember, one of the major elements for protection for illness from spreading colds are, number one, stay home if you're sick. Number two, frequently wash your hands. Cover your mouth when you cough. So all of those old-fashioned rules still apply.
Does federal law COVID requirements trump state laws or vice versa?
The one that's the most strict is the one that you have to follow. And since, other than for medical personnel, there are no federal OSHA rules, CalOSHA rules are the ones that apply for everybody other than healthcare employers.
Confirm you said no pre-screening even if they are not vaccinated.
Well, pre-screening was a concept. Pre-screening is not part of the CDC guidelines or the CalOSHA regulations. That doesn't mean a company can't have a voluntary process of pre-screening. But frankly, nobody gets COVID because of being screened or not screened. What they get COVID from is transmission of respiratory particles. That's why vaccination, they don't have that risk if they're vaccinated. If they're not vaccinated, they should be wearing a mask. So that really has become what we understand as the way to control this disease.
If an employee claims a religious reason, can we require they wear a mask?
You can tell them if there's a place where they can work by themselves in a room and never come near anybody, coming and going, eating, restrooms, or so on, you could reasonably accommodate them by letting them work in that room. But an easier process is to allow them to work remotely if you have that. If not, I would simply say, look, you don't have to wear a mask, but we have an obligation to protect all the other employees who work here. So you can you can wait until these rules are repealed, or you can see a way to work remotely, or you can find out a way to work in an isolated situation. And using the interactive process, which is a process called for by the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the base way I would do that is that here's the problem the company has. How do you suggest we deal with your concerns and your limitations? What reasonable accommodation can we make to you that doesn't impose a burden on us?
Is the employer liable for any injuries sustained from the vaccine if they require the employee to get it?
The employer is not liable. However, the vaccination injury could be covered by workers' compensation. But employers are not liable for their injury from vaccine or a complication of vaccine. The only protection for an employee would be, and the best course is if an employer required the vaccine, then it's the disease and the after effects would be covered as a workers' comp claim. I will tell you that the incidence of workers' comp claims were somewhat significant late last year, and as of this spring have diminished down to being almost not negligible. And realize the most common effects of vaccine are either a sore arm for a day or so, or a general feeling of tiredness or other minor symptoms which go away after 2 days or so. 99% of the symptoms from vaccines, when they do occur, are in this area of minor and transitory symptoms.
Is social distancing still required for healthcare facilities?
The healthcare facilities healthcare facilities operating under a different standard than the CalOSHA. And so their operational issues become imperative to determine social distancing. So there you'd have to look at, for example, a dentist or a dental hygienist cannot socially distance and perform their duties. A person engaging in testing your blood pressure or temperature cannot be socially distanced. So in a healthcare setting, the operational necessity of the duties is really what governs.
Is it okay to mark the employee's badge with a sticker or something to indicate that they have been vaccinated so we know if they shouldn't be wearing a mask, like they do in hospitals during flu season?
If you could mark it so nobody else knows, some secret little code, I would suppose you can, but you have to realize that the vaccination status is medically protected information.
With the new updates that were sent out yesterday, I noticed a part where we are supposed to notify members that if they entered the club without a mask, they are basically attesting to the fact that they are vaccinated. Do you know?
It's a danger to me to suggest you rely on this. If you don't say anything, you're telling us that you're vaccinated. Because the regulations say that you're supposed to, and the guidance from the Department of Public Health say, you're supposed to verify their status. So I think if they didn't say something, somebody needs to come around and say, hey, wait a minute, what is your situation? I think it's very dangerous to rely on a default assumption of vaccination status.
Will you be providing additional updates or another webinar after the Cal-OSHA meeting that was set for today, since they did withdraw the last COVID-19 ETS updates that were sent last week?
We're going to provide an outline of the principles I've talked about today. The PowerPoint is available. We're going to have a several-page outline of the regs and a copy of the frequently asked questions from CalOSHA. Realize this is probably not the last we'll hear from this. We have seen multiple agencies. Also, this doesn't deal with local ordinances like the city and county of Los Angeles, which have had past regulations that affect the worksite, but have said nothing in the last week or so since the June 15th opening. We do know that there are 2 counties that have effective current regulations other than the state, and that's Marin County and Santa Clara County. So if you operate in the San Jose area or Marin County, then you need to check the local ordinances. We'll be keeping monitoring of the ordinances, and we'll be issuing our electronic newsletter, The Bottom Line. If you don't receive that, you could put an inquiry into our info at CalWorkSafety HR and be added to the subscription list for that electronic newsletter, which comes out approximately twice a month and includes any updates. But we'll also make every effort if it's a significant change in policy to educate everybody about it. And we'll give the news media credit. This week, the news media have been very thorough and very accurate in their reporting on both the CalOSHA Standards Board actions and the California governor's actions to reopen California. That hasn't always been the case this whole pandemic, but in the last week or so, the local news media, radio and television have done an outstanding job on coverage of this issue.
Can we have a policy that mixes vaccinated and non-vaccinated employees in the same facility by indicating non-vax employees must wear masks and fully vaccinated need not wear masks?
Yes, and that would be a pretty standard and reasonable rule to adopt.
Are you able to send out the answers to these questions we are asking?
Well, we've recorded this session, so the questions and the answers are all recorded and will be posted on our CalWorkSafety YouTube channel within about a day.
Do we have any more questions? All right. Well, this is an important topic. And remember, if we didn't address your question today, go ahead and reach out to us. As a reminder, CalWorkSafety and HR is dedicated to helping businesses remain compliant and successful. Again, please be on the lookout for future topics on our website at CalWorkSafetyHR.com. And be sure to reach out to us at info@CalWorkSafetyHR.com for a copy of the slides or the video presentation. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, healthy, and have a wonderful day.